A little deeper. Raspier.
Little raspier. I can't even find my notes. Okay, so I'm going to just start with the lesson, and I'm recording it, although I've kind of gotten my backlog fixed. So you can go to the website, and you can go to LionelOffer.com or LDOffer.com, and if you click on the educator button, there's the educator tab or button, it'll take you to the sites for the classes. And in the classes, you can click on to watch old class. And I've almost got all the Colossians up there. I'm still working on it because my software messed up on me. But I should be able to get back into the stream. Boy, you know, it's terrible to get backlogged because the amount of work I have to go through to get one of those things up on YouTube is pretty tough. So anyway, I'm getting all.
Song?
What's that?
Where's our song?
I was thinking we were going to do kind of a rocker raspy.
Are you going to lead us acapella?
We get Acapulco? Yeah. I can't even find my notes. You know, much less sing the notes. I can't even find them. It's terrible. Anyway, I don't even know what notes I was singing this morning. I wasn't even sure if I was even on the page. But we're starting with Psalms, and I was really happy to see that I told the pastors they could change the title if they wanted to, because I put on there as a secondary, you know, the forms of Hebrew poetry, because that's the point. You know, we historically have got this view of writing, of Old Testament, New Testament documents. You know, I like to, you know, expand and show you how the historical importance, or the historical, you know, how important historically the documents are when we talk about New Testament documents. Likewise, that's true of the Old Testament documents. But even more so, we don't really, although we'll talk somewhat about historical, the historical relationships, the historical veracity of the documents. But the big point about these documents, about the Psalms, is the Psalms are poetry. They're literature. They're not intentional history. One might also argue, from one standpoint or another, they're not intentional theology. But we'll talk more about that. For example, how many people sit down with the intent of writing theology or doctrine? The Psalm of David, Psalm of Enid, Psalm of Moses. So did they sit down with the intent of writing a theological document or even a praise document? I mean, if you think about it, think about the well, in the modern music business, what do? They produce a piece of music with the intent of doing what? Entertaining you and selling it to you, right? And selling the music. But highly unlikely that David or Moses sat down with the intent of creating a bestseller, right? So the Psalms themselves are a reflection of the literary content of the times, and even to contrast them more. Yeah, what's that?
Might want to check.
Is that, you think might? I don't think that's making the noise.
No, that's usually one of those little pagers from daycare.
Looks like it's running.
Yeah. We've had this before, and I don't think that makes noises.
Lionel, when you said you were going to talk historical, I may be, but Moses didn't write anything, correct? I mean, was it not passed on orally centuries before it was written down, or were the Psalms written at the time from a historical standpoint?
That's a beautiful question. That is a wonderful question, and you know what I'm going to really bring up. That, you know, there is, looking at the Psalms. We'll get to that. We will get to that big time.
Okay.
Let's think about.
Just hold.
That's good. That's good. That is a fantastic question, and one that I've already got answers to. But let's think about this. All right, when we write, let's say that I'm writing for you judges. I'm writing judges. What's the intent of writing judges, do you think?
History?
Record history. I'm going to record history for you, right? Do you think I'm writing from a literary standpoint?
Do they know literature?
Not at all. As a matter of fact, you know, we got to wait till Cervantes, you know, in English, in modern Western literature, we got to wait till Cervantes, right? And then Daniel Defoe in English literature. If you want to count literature, the oldest novel in any language is Miyazaki's Genshi, Japanese. So until 1000 AD, no one was writing literature, except in what form? Poetry. Poetry. Well, and actually, I'll give you another one. What is the other form they're writing literature in?
Would it be plays? Like
Plays. That's right, plays. So what we find in the Greek documents, okay, we're moving back in history, right? We know our English stuff. I hope we know our English stuff. I always remind you. Our English and our Western civilization kind of literature. But as we move back in time, we see that in the Greek, we have plays. Any fiction in Greek? Very little. And the fiction that you see is not really fiction like in our sense of fiction. It's Aesop's fables, right? It's logos to telos style, trying to tell you something. And you have histories. And then you look further back. And we're looking way back now. We're looking at the period of time we're looking at. And I was going to do this later, but I'll give it to you right now. So the period of time. About when are we talking about the earliest psalm? Anyone want to guess? Anyone want to have any guess? 600 what? 80?
When it was recorded or when the events that were recorded?
See? Now that's the question that Steve asked. Okay? Let's assume, okay, let's say they're the same for now. But you want to guess a guess. Remember, I already gave you a hint. There's a Psalm of Moses. I think it's Psalm 90. We'll get to it, I think. At some point I got in the plan to do it. But Psalm 90 is Moses, Psalm of Moses. There's an earlier psalm that's thought to be an Egyptian psalm. Right out of Egypt. Well, Moses, early date Moses out of taking the children of Israel. Early date, late date? Anybody want to guess? About 1450 BC is early date. At about 1250 or so BC is late date. That's Moses taking the children of Israel. So
when you say that, you're saying that that's the estimate between those two. Correct?
Yeah, the rabbis say about 1250. But there have been early dates that have been proposed based on some of the pharaohs. But I have to agree that 1250 is probably about right. That's pretty close. And if you look at the Davidic era is about 1000 BC. That gives you almost exactly the right time between the two, between Judges and David. So about 1250 BC, about right. They got to be messing around in the wilderness and kind of messing around in Judges a lot longer for the 1450 early date. But just as a proposal, the earliest date would be around 1400s. And if, this is probably about the time that potentially they came into Egypt.
So 2,500 years ago.
Yeah.
Are we talking about a recorded date here? It seems like they're kind of oral tradition. Could be older, possibly.
Could be older. But, okay. This is a perfect question, right? This is a very important and pertinent question. Because when it becomes literature, when does it become literature? When you write it down. It's not literature when it's oral. Right? So, let's just keep that in mind. Don't lose that thought. What's the late date? Well, you could pick a late date and just like say, okay, I'm gonna pick the late date of the late of. It's a laser blinking at me. You could pick the last date. You could say for Malachi. What's Malachi? 4:31. Is that about right? 4:31. 4:31 is probably too late. We believe that the latest we believe that the Psalms were finally put together is about 500 BC, and some scholars will say as late or early as 600 BC. So what we have here is, by any account, a document that spans, or documents that span about 1,000 years, give or take. 1,000 years. Now, the thing that I want you to note with that is a couple of very important points. What did the English language, oh, and I forgot to bring my book. What did the English language look like 1,000 years ago? Huh? Well, you're right, it didn't. There wasn't an English language 1,000 years ago. What were we speaking? Anglo-Saxon. Anglo-Saxon. So you would spell stuff, let's see. Let's see. This is the way that you would spell that in English. This is Anglo-Saxon. That's that. That's in word in English and in Anglo-Saxon. This. Let's see. This. This. And see, I think it's the standard S. This. This is why ye old. There's no such thing as ye old. Why do they say ye old? Because it looks like it. Ye, the in Anglo-Saxon looks just like this. So over the years, the became a ye. It's not ye, it's the. It's a thorna. This is called a thorna. In Anglo-Saxon, you have thorna and F. F looks like this. This is the soft TH, and this is the hard TH. The, that, this. Or the soft TH. What's up? Theater. Theater. Teach you guys Anglo-Saxon and English, right? In normal English, modern English, we don't have two THs. And by the way, we make TH, right? Because what happened in 1066? William the Conqueror. William the other thing if you're an Anglo-Saxon. So what happened in English is we went from Anglo-Saxon and we mixed what in with the Anglo-Saxon? French. My point is this. The difference between Anglo-Saxon and English today is about 1,000 years. 1060. We haven't even got to the date, the 1,000-year anniversary, right? 1066. We've got to wait for 2066 to get there. So we're talking about a period of time for these documents, the Psalms, of about 1,000 years. So do you expect there to be any change in language?
Yes.
Significant change in language. Do you expect there to be a significant additions to language? Matter of fact, we're going to talk more about the history, but we already kind of mentioned it. What is happening here? What is that? That's called the Exodus. The Exodus. Okay, and then what's happening here? This is the Babylonian captivity. Babylon. Okay, so between Exodus and the Babylonian captivity, a whole lot of stuff happened, right? I mean, it's not even like England. Okay, in England, what did you have? From the Anglo-Saxon period until the modern era in England. I mean, you go from nuclear power to barely horsepower, right? So the same thing's true in this, was going from Exodus to Babylon. People miss this point. Technologically, what are we going from?
Caveman,
Well,
Stone Age.
basic Stone Age agricultural, pretty close to, well, there's reasons why it's not quite Stone Age, and answers your question too. Well, let's call this, let's say beginning literacy,
cities.
beginning agriculture, beginning cities, to this is past Iron Age. Iron Age. You know, we don't seem to have the, when we think of the ancient world, what do we think of?
Medieval times.
Well, just all those guys in the old world, right? We don't realize that going from agriculture and wood to iron is like going from, William the Conqueror and horses and nuclear power. See? Incredible change. Incredible changes. And if we're looking at documents written across that period, I'm still saying written across that period, what should we expect to see? Enormous changes. Enormous reflections. And by the way, if you're writing literature, especially poetry, what can you never keep out of it? There's a couple of things you can never keep out of poetry.
Like self-expression.
What's that?
The rhythm,
Well, we'll talk about that. That's an interesting question. What can you never keep out of poetry?
Your culture.
Your culture. Your culture is always reflected in your poetry. And there's something else that you can't keep out that's based in culture. Your technology. Your technology. No matter how much you want to keep it out. Anybody ever read Victorian poetry? Remember the compass? The compass. What kind of compass? There's two types of compasses in English. The author may have meant both. But what was a big deal in Victorian thought? All the new inventions. See, I have Victorian poetry talking about locomotives and power and steam. And matter of fact, if you look at Victorian literature, what was old Dickens writing about the whole time? The plight of the poor, the plight of the development of the, right? The same is true of poetry. You can't keep those two things out of poetry. And so if you have them, what does that point to for us?
history.
History. History. Shows us all kinds of neat historical stuff. And that's what we'll do. Today I've started with Psalm 1. It's a good thing to start with. Very important to start with that psalm for lots of reasons. But I will show you some stuff that we can read into Psalm 1, which, we're just trying to pick it apart to find out if we can discover information about it. Let's talk about this for a second, though. The Psalms. You notice I put this is not Hebrew. This is Greek. Because Psalms comes from this word, P-S-A-L-M-O-I. Psalmoi. Psalmoi. Huh?
It looks a little like Yahoo, but.
Yahoo. Psalmoi. So for Psalmoi, the Hebrews got their word for psalm from the same place they got their word for synagogue. What's that? From the Greek. Why? From the Septuagint. LXX. You guys thought you'd be able to get away from these things, right? You thought, we'll get away from Greek for a little bit. Not so fast. Can't get away from the Greek. Because the Hebrews named the Psalms section from the Greek Septuagint. Now, what does psalm mean? This is really important. It's going to really disappoint some of your friends in Reformed churches and also maybe Church of Christ would be very unhappy. Because the word psalm in Greek means a song accompanied by an instrument. An instrument. There are multiple words in Greek for songs. There are antiphonal songs that are not accompanied by music. There are other types of songs in Greek. As a matter of fact, the one I skipped over from Colossians, when we were studying last Colossians, I said I don't have time to get into it because it mentions psalms, songs, and spiritual songs, right? Guess what? 2 of those are always accompanied by music, by instruments. 1 of them isn't. But those are only 3 of the many Greek words that apply to musical or music or songs. So in Greek, you know, what's really interesting is the Psalms are called in Greek from the Septuagint what kind of songs? Songs that are accompanied by musical instruments. Yeah.
Well, we're talking about literature and writing. When was music first penned down? Did they ever?
These are great, these are beautiful questions, and these are exactly the questions you need to think about. Because I'll tell you, I'm going to give you, I can't answer, the question, for example, when were they written down? I can't tell you for a certain fact, but I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give you ideas, historical ideas, to let us draw conclusions ourselves, right? When was the music added? Obviously, the music was added before what? Before the Septuagint. Because Septuagint, let's give it a date, let's say 300 to 200 BC. Okay? Most scholars think about 250 BC, so that rings it right in the middle. So by 300 BC, all the Psalms, or at least most of the Psalms, have therefore been accompanied by music. Which means it was used probably how? What? In some type of worship setting. Okay? By this time. And there's other evidence that it was before then too. Because, well, there's other evidence. But that's what we'll look at. We'll look at the evidence. Because that's the point.
When was written music, actually, so someone could look at it and say, oh, well, I can pick up that tune. I can see, I know what tune they played with that.
No such thing. Not until around the 1400s. And it wasn't until about that, I had to go back and look at my notes. So, anyone who's really smart with music theory, don't beat me with a stick, but you add in if you got it. But as I understand it, I think that people began writing music around 12 to 1400s, and everyone used different meters and types. And finally, the French, I believe, were the ones who standardized the meter in around the 1700s. And in that time, that's when we went to the standard octave, bars, the way they are today with the standard music type clefs. But it took a long time to get there. So, it wasn't even in this normal period that we're talking about when, we're set. So, doesn't bother me, that's right. So, the big deal is this music, right? That's the song. It's just sing out. But the thing is that, until this period, how do you think they passed on?
Taught and learned,
Probably, passed orally, passed, through training. And what do you think the change was? Musical instruments, okay, we know there were musical instruments in Egypt. Okay, very common to the musical instruments we find later on in the Hebrews using, right? So, but what do you think the change was between here and there with musical instruments?
Pretty dramatic, probably.
Yeah, kind of like between a lyre or maybe a harp and a electric guitar, right? I mean, almost the same type of time period here. So, yeah. So, what do you think happened to that music?
Evolved and reflected social.
As a matter of fact, let me give you this, okay? What do you think? Okay, now let's think Greek. I've taught you to think Greek, and I'm going to teach you to think Hebrew, okay? But we've been thinking Greek for a long time. So let's think Greek. Greek thinking is pretty easy. So if you're Greek and you're going to start, what's your lyre going to look like? If you're starting way back here, what's your lyre going to look like?
3 or 4 strings.
How about one string? Why one string? Well, what do you do? When you start, if you got a psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, how are you gonna obviously start chanting it?
Get a beat.
With one pitch.
Aphonically, one pitch. Aphonically, one pitch, right? One singular pitch. And what do you need to keep them on pitch? One pitch. You don't want them on 2 pitches. You don't want them in 3 pitches because they'll mess it up, right? You want them on 1 pitch. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Okay, that's kind of boring, but for the people that didn't have any music at all, this is pretty good stuff. Matter of fact, before that, before the lyre, before you had a pitch, what did you have?
Drum chanting.
A rhythm, a drum, yeah. So I got a drum, that's where I started, and a drum has a natural pitch, right? But what I really want is, what do I want? I want rhythm with a set pitch. And a drum doesn't really give me that unless it's got a really deep voice. And then maybe you could do your rhythm, right? So, then what did I add? I had more strings. Usually, what I would add is, well, you guys are familiar with dulcimers, right? Dulcimers, what you're looking for is basically not octaves, but,
Chords.
well, you're not building a chord quite yet, but you're building the antecedents to chords. In other words, you're doing it by thirds and fifths, right? Mostly thirds. Because if you do thirds, then what can you sing? Harmony. And so what they did is you would see, okay, maybe 2, maybe 3 pitches, because then you can get the high voices on one and the medium voices on another and low voices on another, just like we do recorders. And I know I'm giving you too much music history, but you know what they do with recorders, right? A soprano recorder does what? The high pitch, the melody, and then you have an alto recorder or a tenor recorder or an alto recorder. Alto recorder does what? Harmony, 3 below, exactly 3 below. So you play the exact same notes, but guess what you are? You're playing in harmony. And then the alto recorder, or the tenor recorder is, guess what? 3rd below that. And so you're playing in perfect, you're playing in a perfect harmonic pitch, in a perfect harmonic chord. Isn't that cool? So yeah, but how many years did it take to get to this? And then finally to get to chords? Well, guess what? Were they at chords here? No, we don't think so. We don't think they got to chords until way late. So, in the development music, okay, this is a long shot. But they're probably, how are they probably singing these songs? Want to take a guess? How about the way we do our songs? You see how we do our songs? That's a cataphony, I think it's called cataphonically. In other words, what you do is you change at the end. You move at the end. And guess what? You generally move how in a very simple cataphonic movement? You move in thirds. That's kind of what we do, right? All this came out of the Middle Ages. And guess what the Middle Ages came out of? Out of the ancient, out of the Greek, out of the Hebrew. So, it's just evidences. It's just evidences how they got there. But of course, they couldn't write it down. Now, here's the big question. Here's the big question. When did they start writing down the Psalms? To get there, let's start with this. Remember all that stuff I taught you about Greek? Okay, don't forget it. But you can stick it in the back of your mind. You're not going to use any of it when we talk about Hebrew. Because if you remember, what kind of language is Greek?
Concrete.
Greek is an absolute concrete language. Now, here's a very important